Hey everybody, welcome to another episode of the Food History Happy Hour. I'm your host, Sarah Wasberg Johnson, also known as the Food Historian. If you are new to the Food History Happy Hour, each week at 8 o'clock Eastern right here on Facebook, I make a vintage cocktail. We discuss some food history and sometimes current events, and you can ask questions live in the comments, and I will do my best to answer them. So you can follow me on Facebook at The Food Historian. I'm also on Instagram at Preserve or Perish. You can visit my website, thefoodhistorian.com. And if you want to support me on Patreon, I'm also on Patreon at The Food Historian. Hi, Marty. I am sorry that my audio is all crackly. Let me see. It looks like I cannot change my microphone at all once we get started. Man, you guys, last week we had such an issue with the third-party integration that I was using, so I'm not using that this week. Hopefully it'll be a little better. We'll see. So we're just gonna try it. And I realized, I don't know that I turned the captions on again. Rats. We'll have to see. I'll have to make sure that I do that next time if they're not available this time. So sorry about that. It's been a little bit of a day. Like, this week was actually pretty nice. I actually got a lot of stuff done. But I got caught in a torrential downpour about an hour ago, so I had to come home and, like, change clothes and everything. And getting ready for tonight. So, hi, Anna Catherine. Anna Catherine is here for the spicy cocktail because that is what we're making tonight. We are making a cocktail from the same bartender's guide that I selected a cocktail from last time, which, let me get the title correct here. It's called Recipes of American and Other Iced Drinks. Was published in 1909, and the cocktail we're going to make tonight is called Flash of Lightning, which probably has a lot to do with the fact that it has cayenne pepper in it. So it calls for brandy, which I'm going to use the last of my cherry brandy that I made last year. I'm not going to use the last of it because it doesn't quite call for this much brandy, but I'm going to try and use it up because it's sour cherry season is coming soon. It also calls for raspberry syrup, which is a very common 19th century drink ingredient that I just decided I needed to have. It calls for half a lemon. I have a little half a lemon right here. Juice of half a lemon. Sugar and cayenne pepper. No, it does not. It says a little cayenne pepper. So for me, that might be like a couple of grains of cayenne pepper because I'm not really super into spicy things. But I thought the kind of spicy sweet combination was super interesting. And also because it doesn't seem like cayenne pepper was necessarily a super common ingredient in the turn of the 20th century. I could be wrong, but you don't see it super often, and you certainly don't see it that often in cocktail recipes. So that's why I wanted to try this cocktail tonight. Thank you, Liz, for telling me that there are captions. That makes me feel better. I think I'm just going to go ahead and get started. So it calls for, let me just pop the recipe up again. This particular bartender's guide says fill a tumbler with chipped ice. So when they're talking about a tumbler, they're not talking about like a short glass that we normally think of as tumblers. They're talking about literally a tumbler. So basically a cocktail shaker. And I don't have chipped ice because I'm not chipping ice from a block of natural ice or a giant block of ice as would be common in the period. So I'm just going to use ice cubes because that's the next best thing. And it says to fill the tumbler with ice. I'm not going to do that, but I am going to put quite a few in there. Alright, so since we are calling for squeezing half a lemon, I have once again my trusty dusty Juice-O-Matic which is my favorite thing. Oh. Crap, you guys. I didn't bring another. Oh, crap. Alright. We're going to do this the really dangerous way. I knew I should have brought up another cup for the lemon. But we'll see. We'll see if this works. If I can squeeze the lemon into the jigger. It's just all action here on the Food History Happy Hour. Oh my god, it's working. Yay! Well, this will be fun. We'll actually get to see what the measure of half a lemon is. Not that much. It's like maybe an ounce. Okay. We're thinking about it. We're done dripping. Yeah. It's like a pony of lemon juice. Put that under there to catch the drips. Alright. Half a lemon, half a teaspoon of sugar. So I just brought a regular size teaspoon. I didn't actually bring a measuring teaspoon. That seems half a teaspoon-ish. A teaspoon of raspberry syrup. So, not that much raspberry syrup actually, which makes me a little bit sad, but that's okay. Again, I'm just going to use a regular spoon to measure. Oh my god, you guys, this smells delicious. Best part. Yum! Ooh, that tastes really good too. Yummy. So now obviously this calls for a half a wine glass of regular brandy, but like I said, I'm improvising a little bit to use up my cherry brandy. So half a wine glass is about 2 ounces. Oh, I licked this. Ugh, alright. Shouldn't have done that. Is that half a wine glass? I mean, it's kind of a lot of brandy, but it's okay, I gotta use it up. Come on. So cherry-y. Alright, in that goes. And then a little cayenne pepper. Now, those of you who grew up in the Midwest like I did, with a very Midwestern palate, know that people's definitions of what's a little cayenne pepper and what's not are different. So I'm gonna make it like really, like a little cayenne pepper. Which maybe that makes me a wuss, but there's not that much liquid in here. And if it's not spicy enough, you can always add more. It's a little bit more difficult to take the heat out. So that's it. And then you shake it and strain it off, which is what I'm going to do right now. Okay, that's probably enough. So I know that was a wussy amount of cayenne. It's probably not going to be that spicy, but you never know. Oh, is this going to be too much? Yep. Yep. We're going to wine glass it. Oh, I just made a mess. Good job, Sarah. I'll clean that up in a second. It's kind of a lot, you guys. Alright. Oh, let me get my little towel here. Of course, there's all kinds of stuff on top of it. That's Mr. Food Historian downstairs, if you can hear him. Chad, you're too loud. No. Okay, sweetie's going down, I guess. Anyway, okay. It smells good. I know, it's, you know, I really don't try to do this, you guys. Once again, another pink drink, although I think that's fairly appropriate for a beverage that contains cayenne pepper. Yeah, that's... There is a little hint of spice at the end. It's not very spicy though, so I am gonna just up the cayenne pepper a little bit. Give it a little stir. It tastes very strongly of cherry, I think, because we put the raspberry syrup in there. So I think if it was just straight brandy, the raspberry flavor would probably come through a little bit more. But it is a very pretty color. This is also probably pretty old cayenne pepper, so. Mmm. Yeah. Yum. Oh my gosh. Cayenne and cherry is delicious, you guys. This is really good. This is really good. Yeah. Yum. Yum. This. Okay. Flash of lightning. You have me convinced. I mean, definitely it's very sweet. Which probably, because I'm using cherry brandy, which already has some sugar in it, I probably could have left the actual sugar out. But that cayenne spiciness with the sweet cherries is kind of addictive, you guys. I'm definitely finishing this one, and I would probably make it again. Yeah. Yum! Good job, 1909 Londoners. I don't know why they think this is American, but it tastes delicious. Alright, so before we launch into my list of things to talk about this evening, does anybody have any questions before we get started? I took notes and everything, you guys. Yeah, Marty, definitely spicy cocktails. It's really not that spicy. I mean, like, you probably could put a lot more cayenne pepper in it. But, you know, I've got a very sensitive palate, so if it's too spicy, I can't handle it. So I thought I would go easy on myself. But even now, I could have a little more cayenne pepper in it. So if you like spicy things, you might want to start with like a couple of good shakes and go from there. But yeah, I would definitely, it's a little dangerous because I'm starting to feel it already. Because it's basically pure brandy. But it's very good. Yes, it is. It is just a little hint of warmth at the end, Anna Catherine, which you're right. You don't want it too spicy. It could probably use a little more though, but I'm not going to overdo it. So, all right. Well, I guess if we don't have any other questions, I'm going to go ahead and get started on my topics for tonight. I actually did take some notes. So, one thing that's been in the news a lot lately is Goya Foods, right? I don't know about you guys. I buy Goya a lot, usually. Mostly their beans, because they actually have, you know, more than 3 varieties of beans, and they're affordable, and I think their beans are fairly high quality, and they have organic, which I like. So that's mostly what I've used them for, but I know that they are very popular in a lot of Hispanic and Latinx communities, in part because that's been part of their business model, is to really have a wide variety of foods that are targeted towards very specific nationalities and ethnicities focused on South and Central America. So, because they say they're Hispanic owned and operated, right? They employ a lot of Hispanic people. It came as a bit of a surprise to a lot of people when their CEO, what's his name? Give me one second. Robert Unanue, I think is how you pronounce their last name, was at a summit that the Trump administration held about increasing support for Hispanic and Latinx-owned businesses. So obviously he was there. That's like the wealthiest Hispanic-owned business in the country. And he said that the United States is very lucky to have President Trump. Which I think at this point is pretty debatable. Like, and I usually like to get too much into politics, but, you know, not our greatest president ever, that's for sure. But a lot of people were very surprised that he made that comment, particularly given Trump's history of commentary about Hispanic and particularly Mexican people. It's not been kind. And then there's also the whole issue of family separation at the border, holding people in camps, basically separating them from their children. So there's been a lot of backlash against Goya for that comment. And I wanted to look a little bit more into who the Unanue family is, where they came from, and a little bit more about Goya to try and understand why they would have this concept of President Trump. Like, Robert Unanue talked about him as like a builder and someone who is inspiring, right? But at the same time, they have a lot of rhetoric in their food company about being pro-immigrant and pro-immigration, kind of like the immigrant American dream. So I did a little bit of research on them. Their earliest immigrant ancestor, right, which is Robert's grandfather, Prudencio, also known as Don Unanue, right, which is the very Spanish honorific, emigrated with his family from northern Spain to Puerto Rico in 1903. And then he married another Spanish immigrant in 1921, and they moved to New York, and in 1936, they form what becomes the Goya Company. They actually start out he starts out as a food broker for products imported from Spain, and then they start their own company in 1936. They basically buy a Moroccan sardine company, right? And they purchase the rights to the brand name Goya from the sardine supplier, and they opened a storefront in Manhattan. He chose the name Goya because it's very simple and short and easy to remember, and also because it's associated with the artist, the famous artist, and associated with Spain. But in 1936, what happens in 1936 in Spain? The Second Spanish Civil War breaks out, right? So that kind of interrupts their supply line a little bit, but they kind of quickly pivot and they make a name for themselves by importing olives and olive oil and other sort of essentially Spanish foods. So the reason why I bring that up is because Spain, people from Spain are not necessarily considered Hispanic to a lot of people. People from Spain are considered white. You know, if you ever filled out the census form, there's white, and then there's white non-Hispanic, right? It's this kind of strange subset of whiteness. And in Spain itself, there is a long history of differentiating purity of blood and purity of lineage. So this dates back to the Moorish occupation of Spain, right? So Moorish people who are Muslim invaded the Iberian Peninsula very early in European history. That's why Charlemagne is so famous, because he stops the Moorish invasion on the Spanish-French border. But Spain was occupied and ruled by Moorish people for quite some time, and there were also a large population of Jews in Spain. So when the Catholic Church takes back over, being of pure lineage means that you have neither Moorish nor Jewish bloodlines, right? So already we're kind of creating our own little version of white Spanish supremacy. This gets translated to North and South America in the Spanish colonies, and also in the Portuguese colony of Brazil, in what's sometimes known as casta, which is a racial case-based system. Now, there's some argument among historians as to how much casta was actually implemented. It's based largely on a series of paintings that were done in Spain in, I believe, the 17th century. But it's basically designations of intermixed races. So it's where the term mestizo comes from, which is Spanish, and indigenous. It's where the term mulatto comes from, which is Spanish, and African heritage, right? And there were some serious class-based differences based on your racial makeup in Spanish-controlled colonies and in Spain itself. So you might ask, why am I explaining all of this? And it's basically to explain that the remnants of those castes socially still exist in Latin America, and to a lesser extent still exist in Spain. So the fact that the Unanue family is Spanish and considers itself Spanish and not Hispanic or Puerto Rican tells you a little bit about how they view themselves in the world. So Robert Unanue and his siblings, their father was Spanish, right? The son of two Spanish immigrants who lived in Puerto Rico and then moved to New York. But their mother is Irish, an Irish immigrant background. So you've got the whole immigrant thing going on. And the family does kind of wax poetical about the value of immigration and the American dream and kind of American immigrants having their own businesses and pulling themselves up by their bootstraps and stuff like that. But they still, I think, have a very white concept of their family, right? So the Goya business itself is very interesting. It's not really run like a lot of food processing businesses, which I found was fascinating. They do hire a lot of Hispanic and Latinx employees, and they have a very interesting marketing scheme. I guess I don't want to call it a scheme because it's not really a scheme, but a very interesting way that they market their foods. So unlike a lot of other food companies, they are direct distributors of their products. So they have warehouses and they ship direct to grocery stores, and grocery stores deal directly with them as a company, which is not common. Usually grocery stores go through like a third party purchaser, kind of like how restaurants use like Sysco or similar to purchase all of their food. They're not dealing with individual distributors or food producers. They just get Sysco, and Sysco does all of that organizing work for them. That's not true with Goya. Goya does its own contacts with groceries. They have their own aisles, right? That's often part of their contract with grocery stores, is they have their own aisle. And they target their products based on the makeup of the community that that store is in, which I find just fascinating because they have a huge range of products. They have like 2,500 different products that they produce. 28 of them are beans, which I love. But so there's this really unique business model that they have. And I found an article from 2013, which I'll link in the blog post, that's talking to the Unanue family and how they run their business and how it's different than a lot of food processors. And one of the things they talk about, which I thought was fascinating, was progressive food. So progressive foods started out as an Italian importing business, much like Goya was a Spanish food importing business. And they kind of followed conventional wisdom from, kind of the, what's the word I'm looking for? The companies who tell you what to do, how to make your business better. I'm totally blanking on the term. I know there's a term. They followed the conventional wisdom and they stopped diversifying. They kind of shrunk their labor base, they specialized, and now they're a soup company that is kind of struggling a little bit to make a name for itself among a lot of other soup companies, notably Campbell's, which has had kind of the lion's share of the market for a really long time. So the Goya company did not want to go that route, and they made an interesting comment about how if they did, a lot of people would lose their jobs, right? Because they wouldn't have delivery drivers, they wouldn't have distributors, they wouldn't have marketers doing market research in all these different grocery store areas, and they felt that they would lose a lot from their business. So although it is like $1 billion business, they say they don't have very high profit margins. However, I think that the Goya family is definitely within the realm of the wealthy. And wealthy white people often like Trump for his policies, which benefit wealthy white people. So, that was my little background into the Goya family and my theory about why a Hispanic-owned company that caters to a broad Hispanic and Latinx community throughout the United States would be Trump supporters. And that's my theory. So, does anybody have any questions about Goya or Spanish supremacy in North and South America? Because we can talk more about that, but that's basically what I wanted to say about Goya. It's getting spicier and more delicious, as it says. So for those of you who are just joining us, I made the Flash of Lightning cocktail from the 1909 Bartender's Guide for American and Other Iced Drinks. It calls for raspberry syrup, lemon juice, sugar, brandy. I used cherry brandy, and cayenne pepper. And it's delicious. So you should make it at home. Although having a spicy drink when it's already kind of hot up here, maybe not my brightest idea, but that's what we're up to. So before I move on to the next topic, does anybody have any questions for me that you want to discuss before we move on? You guys are super quiet. I will say hi to Glenn, who came on not too long ago. Alright, well if you have questions, you can certainly drop them in the comments as we go along. I'm just going to pull up our next topic, or rather series of topics tonight. I thought we did talk a little bit about this last week. Root beer and birch beer and all those fun things. Just kind of scratched the surface. But over the weekend, I had a real homemade, well, semi-homemade, root beer float for the first time in a very long time with the straw and everything, with a really good vanilla ice cream, and I bought like actual A&W root beer, not the store brand. And you guys, it was so good. Like, I forgot how good root beer floats are. Just super yummy. I haven't had one in ages. It was freaking delicious. I think I had like 3 over the course of 2 days. I just could not get enough. We had root beer floats until we ran out of ice cream. And so I thought we could talk a little bit about ice cream floats and root beer and sort of the origins of those root flavored small beers, right? So the first thing I thought we could talk about was the history of root beer, right? So root beer is very old. It's primarily flavored with sassafras root, right? Which you can't really get straight up sassafras root anymore because the FDA has determined that sassafras oil is a carcinogen. So what's used to make root beer now is sassafras root with the oil extracted from it. But then root beer also usually has a whole bunch of other stuff in it, spices, cherry bark, things like that. So it is quite old, but it wasn't really commercially produced until the 1890s. So you could buy soda fountain purveyors and pharmacists who ran soda fountains could purchase like root beer extracts and powders and things like that. But the first person to bottle it and sell it was a Philadelphia pharmacist named Charles Elmer Hyers. And he based his root beer on an herbal tea that he had in New Jersey. And his recipe had more than 25 herbs, berries, and roots in it, right, to flavor carbonated soda water. So he introduced his version to the public at the 1876 Philadelphia Centennial Exhibition, and then he started bottling it in the 1890s. There are a number of other root beer companies that were founded fairly early on. So Barks Root Beer was created in 1898 in New Orleans. A&W was created in 1919 in Lodi, California. Dad's Root Beer, which I completely forgot about, was created in the 1930s in Chicago. And Mug Root Beer was originally known as Belfast Root Beer from the Belfast Beverage Company in the 1940s as well. So root beer, I think, is kind of a quintessentially American drink, along with its lesser known cousins of birch beer, sarsaparilla, and even more rare spruce beer, which you don't get hardly at all. So I did find a really cool, what's it called? It's a standard manual of soda and other beverages from the 1890s, and they have a whole chapter on mead, ginger ale, beers, meaning all those root-based beers, wines, and ciders. So I'm going to drop it in the comments for you guys to peruse. There's some pretty interesting ones in there. Including, so there's like a bajillion different ginger ale recipes, including one submitted by James Werner from Detroit, Michigan. If anybody's ever been to Detroit, you know that Werner's ginger ale is like an obsession there. But there's a ton of different ones. There's birch beer. So the primary ingredient in birch beer, it shares a lot of similar ingredients with root beer, but the primary ingredient is birch bark and wintergreen, which gives it a slightly more spicy flavor. There's also Horehound beer. If anybody's ever had Horehound candy, that's another kind of very brown herbal tasting beverage. Hop-based beers and ales. Peruvian beer, which just says this may be prepared like root beer or birch beer with no other ingredients. So I assume it's made with Peruvian bark, which is cinchona, right, which is the primary ingredient in tonic. I shouldn't say it's the primary ingredient. It's the primary reason why we have tonic, right? And then, of course, root beer and sarsaparilla beer and spruce beer. And then they do also have a tonic beer, which ironically does not have Peruvian bark in it. So it might be tonic in the, more traditional sense. So anyway, that's a little bit of the history of root beer. The root beer float also has kind of an apocryphal story. So root beer floats are also known as black cows or brown cows, which is like a soda fountain diner type slang, right? So it's the brown color of the root beer, and it's cow because you put ice cream or dairy in it. And so the apocryphal story is that Frank Wisner owner of Colorado's Cripple Creek Brewing, created the first root beer float on August 19th, 1893. So there's a couple of different stories. One of them is that he noticed the snowy peaks of Colorado's Cow Mountain looked like ice cream floating in soda. And the other one I've heard is that he just ran out of ice and he wanted to cool down a beverage, so he put ice cream in it instead. Which I think the latter is probably more likely, right? So in my personal, view of trying to myth bust stuff, I wanted to figure out, is he really the first person to make a root beer float? So probably, because it seems like root beer really doesn't get popular into the latter half of the 19th century. But there is a guy, let me open this link here. There is a guy named G.W. Dowse, who in the 1850s basically invents a soda fountain that has a dispenser for shaved ice that gets mixed with syrup and cream. So he called it an ice cream soda fountain. So is that actually an ice cream float as we know it today? Ice cream, like churned ice cream? No, it's shaved ice and cream and soda. But I think it's similar enough that he might be the first person to be doing essentially ice cream floats. Nowadays, people would probably call them Italian sodas. So it's soda water and syrup and just straight cream. But I think the shaved ice, maybe gave it a little more of a texture. So the reason why he has a shaved ice dispenser is because at the time, he was shaving ice from the block of ice that he would order, a block of naturally harvested freshwater ice. Not always the cleanest in the 1850s, high cholera. But it was super popular. And that was really the start of soda fountains. So carbonated beverages themselves date back to the 18th century. I think last time I talked about Apollinaris water, which is from Germany, but carbonated waters were associated with like spa towns, right? Because that's where you get naturally carbonated fizzy waters. But pretty quickly they figured out how to artificially carbonate water. And Dowse was also the first person to bottle ginger ale in the United States in 1861. Right, so he's kind of doing the same thing. So ginger ale predates, commercially available ginger ale predates root beer by quite a lot, about 30 years. But of course you could get both when you went to a soda fountain for quite a long time. So I thought that was just a little bit of interesting history about soda fountains and kind of the origin of ice cream floats, and especially root beer floats. I don't know what it is. Liz loves root beer floats. I love root beer floats. Anna Catherine says shaved ice plus cream plus soda sounds delish. It super does, right? And if you've ever had shaved ice, like actual shaved ice, it's not like an ice, like, what's the word I'm looking for? It's not like a most modern snow cones. Most modern snow cones are like little hard little ice crystals. Shaved ice is like this very lovely, soft, snow-like product. If you've ever eaten snow, Northern girl, of course I've eaten snow. It tastes a lot more like that than it does like a modern snow cone, which is ironic because it's called a snow cone. And originally, yes, they were hand-shaved ice cones, and occasionally you'll find some like little artisanal snow cone place that does it. But nowadays it's like finely crushed ice, which is not the same. Not the same. So actual shaved ice plus cream plus soda probably was delicious. There is also a little subset of root beer floats that I didn't realize until I moved out here to the Northeast, which is basically you mix the ice cream, usually at soft serve ice cream places, you mix the ice cream with the root beer as if it was a shake. Sometimes they do the whole thing like that. Sometimes you do part of it and then you add more soft serve ice cream and more straight root beer. That is also super delicious. You don't get the bubbliness as much because obviously you've stirred it all up, right? But it's basically a blended root beer float and it's delicious. Super delicious. I don't know that there's a more indulgent treat. I don't know why root beer floats seem more indulgent than like a milkshake or something. It's probably because a lot of modern root beer is really quite sweet. But it's just that interesting kind of caramely, spicy, but not really spicy flavor that just goes so well with vanilla ice cream. All right. Those are my topics, you guys. Does anybody have any questions? I feel like we're super quiet this week. Not as many people watching, maybe. So let me just check my notes. See if I'm missing anything that I wanted to talk about. But I think that was pretty much it. Yup. I'm just gonna drink my spicy drink, I guess, and wait for questions. If you're just joining us, I made the Flash of Lightning cocktail from 1909, which is brandy, sugar, lemon juice, raspberry syrup, and cayenne pepper. And it's awesome. And the spice is definitely like the more you drink it, the more heat is kind of lingering on the palate. And it's kind of addictive, so. Oh, Marty, good question. Marty says, any particular reason why all root beers except Barq's don't have caffeine? So I think it's because it kind of predates the sort of more turn of the century sodas. It's a little bit more old-fashioned. So like ginger ale doesn't have caffeine in it either. But colas do. And I think it's because of why they were created. So colas, in particular Coca-Cola, was actually created as a health tonic, like more as like a medicine. If anybody has watched The Food That Built America, they go into this in more detail. But basically the guy who invented Coca-Cola was always in incredible pain, and he was looking for a way to mask the taste of the morphine he was taking constantly. He was a Civil War vet. So I think the colas and things like 7-Up, which originally had lithium in it, like that's the up part of 7-Up. I think because they were sort of more associated with medicine and this kind of turn of the century idea that, you know, you would be taking these syrups and sodas and, you know, opiates in wine kind of a thing, is why they have things like caffeine in them. And I think caffeine is just the last drug that we have decided is not harmful, and so it's still allowed to be in these sodas, right? So root beer, ginger ale, birch beer, those were more about the flavor than any real medicinal qualities, right? So nobody making, I shouldn't say nobody, but probably nobody making root beer was trying to mask the taste of morphine so that they could not be in constant pain from their Civil War injuries. I also think, you know, they were kind of started at maybe a slightly more innocent time. You didn't have as many people addicted to opiates and heroin and cocaine and hashish and all those other fun things that were kind of huge societal problems at the turn of the 20th century. confused me, Glenn. I will have to look that up for next time. Glenn says, I never knew if this was accurate, but I was told back in the 80s that at one point the FDA regulations required caffeine in anything called root beer, and that they had removed it in the 1970s. I mean, I don't know that, caffeine is not, I don't think, naturally occurring in any of the ingredients in root beer. So I think it is something that you would have to specifically add in. Unlike cola, I think. Yeah. I'll have to look into that. I'm not sure, Glenn. That's something that I'll have to research. I'll probably end up, looking at actual FDA regulations, which is always fun. But I think probably more likely is that because root beer and ginger ale and birch beer, sarsaparilla, all those things were not really associated with medicine, that's why it's not in there. But you never know. You never know. I mean, definitely sassafras root does have some kind of medicinal qualities. There's, particularly in Appalachian regions, people did make sassafras root tea in the spring, supposedly to thin the blood, right after a long winter of kind of monotonous eating. Apparently that thickened your blood, and you wanted sassafras tea in the spring to thin your blood, so it's kind of like a spring tonic that people would take as a tea, which is probably how, what's his name? Charles Hines is kind of encountering it. He encounters it as a tisane, or a tea, an herbal tea first, and then decides it's better off carbonated, which is root beer, that's what I'm talking about. But I don't know that any of that is naturally occurring. I am curious enough now that I'm going to Google it on my new phone. For those of you who follow me on Facebook, I did not have a good week with technology. Both my phone and my laptop bit the dust. So I am happily live streaming from a brand new, very expensive laptop. And I have a not very brand new, insurance paid for phone. So I can actually look things up for you. Apparently it was for Barq's root beer in particular to distinguish itself from other root beers. Although I have to tell you, and I will share it later tonight on the Food Historian page, I ran across an original Mountain Dew advertisement from the 1960s that's like very kind of moonshine related. Very stereotypical depictions of Appalachian people, and it's about how Mountain Dew has like this kick, pop or something. It's like an explosion in every bottle, basically, which I think is related to the caffeine content. It's very 1960s and a little ridiculous. I will dig it up and post it on the Food Historian Facebook page, and I'll also link it in the blog post after this episode. But I think a lot of soda bottling companies were just sort of doing crazy things to differentiate themselves. And I think with Barq's root beer in particular, adding caffeine was one way that they could do that. Okay, Anna Catherine says, in your research on historic cocktails, are you finding many that are savory? My impression is that early cocktails usually lean sweet, and the savory cocktail thing is more recent. That is a good question. I mean, I am biased towards sweet cocktails for sure. So that tends to be what I focus on, right? It's kind of like selection bias. So I haven't really noticed many savory ones. I mean, I think definitely there are a lot that are just like booze and lemon juice kind of a thing, but a lot of them do have syrups, and that I think has to do with in general with the American obsession with sugar in the late 19th and early 20th century. Like, we just love sugar and everything, and that's also kind of why we get soda fountains, as that's the temperance movement's answer to bars and saloons. right? Someplace where you can go and have a beverage with your friends, but it's not alcohol, so you're not getting drunk. So they were billed as a much more wholesome, much more family-friendly alternative. But it's a huge increase in sugar consumption. And that has a lot to do with kind of, I think, exchanging one vice for another, one addiction for another. Oh, interesting. Marty says the fruit was first used to mask poor liquor quality. Huh. I don't know if I agree with that, because you are getting, I mean, cocktails in the United States date back really to the 1860s, if not earlier. And they're served in some pretty high-class establishments, so I'm not sure that the fruit is necessarily to mask poor liquor quality, particularly since in urban areas, fresh fruit was not inexpensive. Right? It could be fairly expensive depending on the season, which is probably also why you see fresh fruit in season in a lot of those early recipes. But yeah, I'll have to do a perusal of some of those early bartenders' guides to just see. But I think your instinct is right, Anna Catherine, that they did like sweet drinks. I mean, I think Americans, even in the 18th and 19th century, there was a real interest in sweet alcoholic beverages. A lot of ciders, which was really the American beverage until German immigrants introduced, pilsners and things like that. So cider can sometimes be quite sweet. It can also be quite dry, but it is fruit-based, so it can be quite sweet. Port, wine, and other fortified wines like Madeira are quite sweet. Brandies, particularly fruit brandies, were very sweet. Cherry Bounce being one instance. And I have to tell you, my Cherry Bounce, I put less sugar in mine than the original George Washington version. George Washington version is like equal parts alcohol and sugar, which is practically a syrup. I did not want to go that far, and I'm really glad I didn't. But yeah, I think the tendency is towards sweet. So I will do some research for next time and report back on whether or not sweet beverages are the norm. My instinct is that they are, but I will see if I can find many savory versions. Okay. Oh, Anna Catherine, do you think the early ciders weren't fermented fully dry? Interesting, I assume they were. So I think, I think people were drinking the cider kind of at all stages, right? I don't know that much about cider production, oenologist expert, but I assume that the longer you allow it to ferment, the more of the sugar the yeast is going to eat up. But yes, if you can find that out, that would be great. All right, Glenn asks, in the context of that discussion was how Orange Crush was the most highly carbonated soda at the time. A couple of years later, P&G took the caffeine out of that. Orange Crush was caffeinated originally? That's crazy. Hi, Carla. Thanks for joining us. Glad you can make it. All right, now I gotta look up Orange Crush caffeine, because that is crazy for me. Oh, Orange Crush invented in 1916? I didn't know that. Of course, now it's all about that it doesn't have any caffeine. So I'll have to look into that a little bit, but yeah. All right, so next time we're going to talk more about soda and the caffeine content of different sodas and why, right? We're going to talk about whether or not 19th century savory cocktails were a thing. I think definitely by the time we get to the mid-20th century, maybe even the 1930s, 20s and 30s, the more savory cocktails were a thing, like, a dirty martini with olives. That's not a sweet beverage. But I really can't think of that many truly savory cocktails. I mean, definitely, I think I've talked about before that there were infused gins, right, that you just serve straight or with plain soda, so that's not sweet, but that's not really that savory either. But like pine or wormwood or tansy infused gins. Yeah, good questions. Good questions that I can't answer, so I'm going to do research for next week. Does anybody else have any questions I can maybe answer? While I drink my super delicious, spicy lightning cocktail, flash of lightning cocktail. Definitely the longer it sits, the spicier it gets. So maybe don't add more cayenne pepper up front. Yeah. Really good though. Spicy, sweet, alcoholic, cherry, really cherry flavor. Super good. Would make again. Alright, so Glenn is clarifying that Orange Crush was not originally caffeinated, just for a few years around 1980. Well, that makes sense because they're probably trying to differentiate themselves like Barks from the competition, and adding caffeine is one way to do that. Yes, Anna Catherine is correct. As it warms up, the heat hits you more. I think also the spice just starts to like release a little bit more the longer it soaks. So funny, it looks like I'm drinking some kind of wine because it's in a wine glass, but it's not. It's almost entirely cherry brandy. Yum. Okay, friends. 3 more minutes. Anything else we want to discuss before we are done for the evening? Like I said, I will dig up that Mountain Dew, that crazy Mountain Dew commercial, and I'll post it right after Food History Happy Hour so you guys can check it out. How about any requests for next week? If you don't have questions right now. So far on the topic list is research about savory cocktails in the 19th century. And we can talk more about sodas and other carbonated beverages and their histories on whether or not they had caffeine. We could definitely do that next week. We can talk about like 7-Up and Coca-Cola and Dr. Pepper and all those fun origin stories. Any other requests? Otherwise, I'm just going to sit here and drink my cocktail. And be super excited about my brand new computer with its giant screen. No? Last call. This would be like a really good winter drink because it's like starting to warm the whole esophagus from the cayenne pepper. So, Anna Catherine asks, are you familiar with the book Mountain Spirits? It's from the 70s and a ton of fun. A Chronicle of Corn Whiskey. From King James Ulster Plantation to the American Appalachians and the Moonshine Life. That sounds extraordinarily 1970s. Yes, okay, Anna Catherine says, a guy went up into the mountains of North Carolina, Georgia, and interviewed a bunch of former moonshiners. It's where I first learned about cherry bounce. Awesome! That sounds totally up my alley. I love the 1970s, kind of, you know, bicentennial, colonial revival. We have to go interview all these people before they die. kind of books. Grassroots Cooking by Jean Anderson is like the food version of that. But I am totally going to add Mountain Spirits to my reading list. Thank you, Anna Catherine. I do have a couple of other books that I've ordered about, you know, the history of booze that I just haven't read yet. Oh, and there's a sequel. That sounds super fun. Is it about women and booze? I hope so. Oh, it was published in 1984. I mean, definitely the bicentennial craze for oral histories and kind of, you know, roots music and historic foods and foodways. That was all kind of a thing from prior to the bicentennial really until, I would say, the early 90s. It kind of starts to fall off a little bit, but people are still super interested in that stuff today and getting it out there. So, all right. It's officially been an hour. So I think we're going to be done for the evening. Thank you, everybody who joined tonight. We made the Flash of Lightning cocktail from 1909 with cayenne pepper in it, along with lemon juice, sugar, cherry brandy, and raspberry syrup, which I finally bought. So I can now make all the cocktails that call for raspberry syrup. I'm Sarah Wasberg Johnson, also known as the Food Historian. This has been the Food History Happy Hour, which happens every Friday at 8 o'clock right here on Facebook. Thanks so much, everybody, for joining me. I had a great time. The cocktail was super delicious. You should all try it. And we will see you right here next week, Friday at 8 o'clock. Have a great night, everybody, and I'll talk to you all soon. Bye.